Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise.
This episode is brought to you by Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels and music are made for each other. They share a rhythm in the craft of making something timeless while being a part of legendary nights. From backyard jams to sold-out arenas, there's a song in every toast. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Jack Daniels and Old No. 7 are registered trademarks. Tennessee whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Jack Daniel Distillery, Lynchburg, Tennessee.
Isaac, what the hell is going on in Portland right now?
Well, if you listen to our president, it's a war zone.
Isaac Stanley Becker is a writer over at The Atlantic. For the last week or so, he's been chasing down a lie.
You look at what's happened with Portland over the years, it's a burning hellhole. And then you have...
This lie is about what's happening in Portland, where for weeks there have been protests outside of an ICE facility on the south side of town. Protests that have become a familiar part of the president's shtick.
How about Portland, Oregon, where it looks like a war zone? And I get a call from the liberal governor. Sir, please don't come in. We don't need you. I said, well, unless they're playing false tapes, this looked like World War II. Your place is burning down.
I feel like I need to emphasize the lie here, because what the president is doing is just that dangerous.
If you take a look at what's been going on in Portland, it's been going on for a long time, and that's insurrection. I mean, that's pure insurrection. And then you have...
Does that jibe with what you saw when you went there?
It certainly does not. The notion that Portland is a war zone is really just laughable if you go to the city and spend any time there. I just can't emphasize enough how limited, at least at this moment in time, these protests have been.
Allow me to explain what the city of Portland actually looked like over the weekend. The annual marathon went off without a hitch. There was a film festival in town. Kids painted pumpkins at the King Farmers Market. Meanwhile, Isaac was busy trying to figure out who exactly was camping out on the sidewalk in front of that immigration processing facility.
They were families, they were labor organizers, clergy, young people, old people, a topless woman, people in wheelchairs.
Notably, there were right-wing personalities in the crowd too. Streamers, influencers.
I think the largest crowd I saw was maybe 200, 250 people. That was on the Sunday after the president's Truth Social saying that he was authorizing troops to use full force in the city.
Even 200 seems pretty small.
I've covered protests that are just orders of magnitude larger than that.
I was struck by a word you used to describe the protests you saw. You called them ritualized. Why did you use that word?
I think as a relative newcomer, I quickly became accustomed to the kind of script that they all seem to be operating under. There were, moments or there were acts that gave the days or the protests a kind of rhythm. So they're at this ICE facility, and every, hour, 2 hours, there's a need to bring in cars or have cars exit for conducting raids or doing a shift change. And so the federal agents come out in tactical gear, shields, many of them with neck gaiters covering their faces, and they kind of push the crowd back. So that's part of the ritual. And they stand there, the protesters shout, they kind of are forced backwards. And when the officers are gone, the crowd refocuses on other things. There's music, there's some dancing.
There's also bickering. Sometimes those MAGA types will wade into the protesters' space just to see what happens.
All right, I want to walk through. I want to give a tour of the camp. So, all right, let's go. Ready?
This guy, Nick Sorter, tried to walk under a protester's tent while carrying a big American flag.
Get out of the way. This is a sidewalk. Get out of the way. Touch her.
So it all seemed a little bit like a kind of high school sports rivalry where they all sort of knew their place and knew their lines in the script.
Seems to me, listening to you, there's a real question about whether what's happening in Portland is real or if it's performance. Or maybe it's both.
I think that's so well put. We live in this moment when the President of the United States will say things that are just observably false and say them in outlandish ways. So both sides are kind of engaging in this play with surreality in a way that is somewhat mind-bending.
Today on the show, what's really happening in Portland, Oregon, and why the National Guard is not going to help. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. With the weather getting cooler, if you're like me, you're looking around for a couple of new items for your wardrobe, like a new sweater, some cute new kicks. And Saks Fifth Avenue makes it easy to get creative with your personal style and find the best arrivals for fall. I went over to Saks.com to check out what they've got on tap, and I gotta say, what I love about clicking around their website is that every piece looks special, one of a kind. As if you'd walk into the office or a party and instantly grab everyone's attention. All the big brands are there, stuff like Alice and Olivia, you know, the young and trendy stuff. I love that I can see the care in every piece Saks has chosen for their fall collections. Each dress or pant or shoe feels a little bit elevated. So if you want shopping to be fun and easy, head over to Saks Fifth Avenue for inspiring ways to elevate your personal style every day. If you go to the site of the ICE protest in Portland, Isaac says the people who are there every day are making as much of an effort as possible to show that this city is not the hellhole you might be seeing in right-wing media. Many of the protesters are in costume, for instance, but also there are ways this gathering feels a little bit like a vigil.
Outside the facility, there are the names and faces of some of the people who've allegedly been detained on laminated pieces of paper. They include allegedly someone who came in to sign papers, a mother of four, seemingly non-violent people, not the kind of hardened criminals that I think many people anticipated ICE would be focusing on. And so there's a real objection to this.
You got a tour of the protest site, right? Describe who gave you that.
One of the very visible presences at the protest has been this young man wearing a chicken suit, a bright yellow chicken suit, and also draped in an American flag with hearts for stars. And I spoke to him. His name is Jack Dickinson. He's 26 years old.
You said he was a former math teacher for elementary school?
That's right. A former elementary school math teacher, grew up in Portland. Parents are still in the area. And, he walked around, and one of the things he helped explain to me was how the protests grew into what they are now. So we all remember earlier this year, early in the second Trump administration, so much attention was focused on Elon Musk, who is heading up Doge, who was a very visible presence in the Oval Office. And it just so happens that right next to the ICE facility is a Tesla dealership and service center. So there were some pretty lively protests against Musk earlier in the year. And then those morphed, I would say by about June, into protests that were really focused on the ICE facility. So we walked around, we walked to the Tesla dealership, the area where the encampment is. And again, when I say walk around, I mean 100 paces or a couple hundred paces. This is a really small area across the street from the facility where there's a lot of graffiti. There's a large high-rise apartment building kind of on the corner there. So it's a sort of claustrophobic area. And when the crowd grows, when there's even 200 people there, it gets pretty crowded. They try to cordon off the street so that traffic doesn't interfere. It can be a kind of combustible space, but it's certainly not a war zone, a far cry.
Yeah, just the other day, Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesperson, described what's happening in Portland as riots.
For more than 100 days, night after night after night, the ICE facility has been really under siege by these anarchists outside. They have been disrespecting law enforcement. They've been inciting violence. We saw, again, a guillotine.
Troubling for the neighbors. That's maybe true. Maybe the people there were there to cause mayhem and havoc. She said that too. It's interesting, those words, because it's like some of it, I'm like, I think the people are there to cause mayhem and havoc a little bit, right? But
I was just going to say, I think mayhem and havoc are certainly part of the aim for some of the protesters. I spoke to some people who emphasize nonviolence, civil disobedience, showing dissent, the importance of symbolism. I do think some of the people, their aim is to make life difficult for these ICE officers because they believe that they are engaged in illegal, immoral behavior that history will judge harshly. And so is the protest site an inconvenience for many of the people living nearby? I think that's a given. And I think different people would blame different players in this. Is it the fault of the officers who've been spraying mace and shooting pepper balls? Or is it the fault of the protesters who come night after night, make noise, put graffiti around public property and other sites? It's a nuisance. And have they made life difficult for the ICE officers? I think they certainly have. I think it would be unpleasant to show up to work every day and have people shouting at you and telling you to kill yourself and that you're like the Gestapo. I think that's an unpleasant work environment. And I think it's a sign of the moment we are in this country where these types of claims are being made and being made by people who believe them fervently.
When the White House talks about what's going on in Portland, they use the word Antifa a lot. Do people on the ground talk about themselves as members of Antifa?
Yeah, Antifa is a word that's been used so promiscuously in recent years. It's interesting because Portland is home to one of the oldest known Antifa groups, Rose City Antifa. But even that is a diffuse organization. It's kind of hard to understand who exactly its leaders are and what their role is. There were some people who were alleged to be affiliated with it who were arrested and served time in prison as a result of some of the earlier, more tense protests, say over the past 8 or 9 years. I think that the protesters have kind of ambiguous relationship to the term because they do see themselves as protesting against fascism. They certainly see the president's tactics and methods and some of what he's doing as fascist. And they also are concerned about the way that the label they think is being used to criminalize anti-fascist protest. So there's a desire to, for that reason, identify with it and say, I am anti-fascist, I'm standing up to this, and I'm reclaiming it. But I also think there's a reticence because the label has been used and abused by those who certainly aren't part of it and are looking to score political points.
Even the guy in the chicken suit told you when you asked, are you Antifa? He's like, maybe.
That's right. There were other kind of amusing moments like this. Like there was an issue with fiber optic cables that some type of utilities crew had to come fix late one night. And some of the members of the encampment, the group that's there 24 hours, were sort of laughing and saying with merriment, you guys are now Antifa, here you are, you're part of Antifa. So I think that, again, back to the use of farce and kind of clownishness, there's an effort to make fun of the way that the president is trying to demonize and, attack anti-fascism.
It's funny. These protests are going on in front of an ICE facility. I hear so much more about the protesters, the people in chicken outfits and the quote-unquote independent journalists who are right-wing provocateurs. I hear about them much more than I hear about migrants who are maybe being brought into this facility or cases where people are being taken away from their families. Is that meaningful?
I think it's a really critical point, actually. And I think it is important that we don't get so caught up in these vivid scenes of protest and clownishness that we forget what the actual subject of the protests is. And I mentioned those laminated pieces of paper that show some of the faces and the names of the people who've allegedly been detained. Another thing I would mention is that some of the faith leaders I spoke to mentioned that a lot of them have been trained to help provide social and legal services to the people who are brought in for appointments or other types of processes in the facility. But a lot of that has become more difficult as the place has become more securitized. And, there is a feeling, I think, within ICE that they're under siege. And so there's been just a curtailment of some of those kind of abilities to check in on the migrants, to make sure that they're getting the legal and social services they need.
Isaac, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
After the break, if the president believes Portland is a war zone, is it just a matter of time before he bends reality to his will?
Imagine fast hydration, combined with balanced energy, perfectly flavored with zero artificial sweeteners. Introducing Liquid IV's new Energy Multiplier Sugar-Free. Unlike other energy drinks, the ones that make you feel like you're glitching, it's made with natural caffeine and electrolytes, so you get the boost without the burnout. Liquid IV's new Energy Multiplier Sugar-Free Hydrating Energy. Tap the banner to learn more.
Doug. Here we have the Limu Emu in its natural habitat, helping people customize their car insurance and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Fascinating. It's accompanied by his natural ally, Doug.
Limu? Is that guy with the binoculars watching us?
Cut the camera. They see us.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Savings vary. Underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates. Excludes Massachusetts.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success. Like your enrollment specialist, who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
After getting off the line with Isaac, I called up Elizabeth Lopato, a senior reporter at The Verge. I was genuinely curious how the president's impression of what's going on in Portland could look so different from what Isaac saw. I got a feeling, though, that this disconnect did not surprise Elizabeth one bit.
No, it really doesn't. We've gotten to a point where Donald Trump himself is now qualifying this by saying things like, well, if what I'm seeing is accurate, or mentioning that, like, is the TV lying to me? So there seems to be a real disconnect between whatever information, and I use information loosely, that the president is getting and what is actually happening in Portland, Oregon right now.
Yeah, can we talk about that disconnect? Like, is the TV lying to him? Like, tell me what this protest has looked like on, say, Fox News or Steve Bannon's podcast over the last month.
There have been a number of incidents where, for instance, You have a MAGA influencer named Nick Sorter who got arrested by the Portland police and then immediately, when he was released, posted, "Hey, you made a big freaking mistake. You prove what we've all been saying for years. You're corrupt and controlled by the violent Antifa thugs who terrorize the streets." And then after that, like, Stephen Miller had a meltdown on Twitter about, the leftist judges who are protecting the Antifa terrorists by not letting him send in the National Guard. So it seems like there's some sort of alternate reality going on that is being portrayed by influencers and that seems to be overriding whatever is actually happening on the streets of Portland, Oregon.
Last month on Steve Bannon's podcast, he said,
Antifa's burning down Portland every night, stopping officers from ICE officers doing their job.
Over at the Daily Wire, a guy named Michael Knowles said, "You can see it, the pictures of Portland in just the last month or two. It looks like a war zone." And then it feels like that's trickling down to this administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's not a secret that this administration is working in lockstep with a bunch of influencers and is a little bit addled by Twitter, right? Like that's something I think we've all seen, whether that's, Elon Musk being in the White House or the closeness that we see certain influencers having with the president. There's this very close relationship between content creators and the actual administration. And so if you think about it from that point of view, going to Portland and getting yourself arrested is great content. That's going to play. It's going to create a bunch of outrage. And once you've done that, then you have an excuse to do the thing that it kind of seems like the administration wanted to do anyway. Because if you've been following some of the stuff that they've been saying about Antifa, they seem to believe it is organized. And there was an executive memo that went out that basically said, we're going to use the entire powers of the federal government to prosecute anybody who we deem to be Antifa. And it's defined very, very vaguely.
Yeah, it calls Antifa a domestic extremist organization. Is that even a thing?
No. And if it were, a lot of people who had been involved in January 6th would have been prosecuted as domestic extremists. That's not really a thing, but it is, I think, a pretty naked attempt to try to invoke the powers from the Patriot Act and use them against people in the United States.
And Portland has a history of being associated with Antifa, right? Even though Antifa isn't one organization, organized, et cetera, Portland does have a history here.
Yeah, there's a history, particularly with Donald Trump, right? So if you cast your mind back to the wilds of 2020, when there were all of these protests going on, Portland was a place where there were pretty intense confrontations with police. And where protesters, you had the dads who were out there with their leaf blowers blowing back tear gas, people coming out and cleaning up trash after the protests. There was a pretty substantial number of people who were engaged in these protests, which of course escalated.
The National Guard was called out for that, right?
That's right.
I think it's useful to go back to 2020 just to examine, did having federal troops on the ground back then help? Because, of course, that's the remedy that the Trump administration is proposing now. Over the weekend, we saw they tried to send the National Guard from Oregon into Portland. That was blocked by a judge. Then there was this end run where they went they tried to bring in California National Guard troops. That was also blocked by a judge. So it's just very clear there's an effort here. And did it help the last time? How did it impact the city of Portland?
I mean, it escalated the protests in a pretty intense way. And one of the things that I think maybe has been memory hold is that, at one point, the federal forces were vanning people, they were grabbing people and essentially kidnapping them and putting them in vans.
I remember these videos, and I'm so glad you brought it up because I had kind of memory hold it. But of course, now that you say it, I remember it.
Yeah. And so, it really escalated the protests. It brought out a lot more people. It made the conflict a lot worse. And then in some ways, it seemed like it hardened the left. So, we're not there right now what we're seeing is like a guy in a frog costume doing pelvic thrusts at riot police. But there definitely is this sort of lingering memory of the way that the federal government behaved in 2020.
It's interesting because after those protests in 2020, the federal intervention, which didn't go so well, it really does seem like the city of Portland tried to adjust and think about, how do we do things differently next time? There are reports that in the crowd now are these dialogue officers, people who are basically liaisons between the police and protest organizers. There are people in white shirts instead of the normal police uniforms. Like, they're trying to modify how they approach crowds like this, which is really interesting to me.
That's right. And part of what else is going on in the background is you have local politicians who are saying, to their constituents, like, hey, can you cool it so that we can negotiate? Like, can you be cool for a minute? Like, we're trying to talk him out of this. But it's interesting how much that hangs over this, that I think that the local officials are doing their best to just kind of try not to repeat, right? And part of not repeating it is not escalating from the police side.
I think it's worth lingering too on the weekend back and forth in court with Donald Trump's attorneys and attorneys from the state of Oregon, because it's notable to me that when the Trump administration tried to deploy the National Guard, they were blocked not just by any judge, but by a judge who was appointed by Donald Trump himself. She worked with Ken Starr into the investigation of President Bill Clinton. She was a U.S. attorney under President George W. Bush. Like, this is not a snowflake liberal. And yet in her order, she's basically saying what the government is saying is untrue and verifiably untrue. That seems notable to me.
It is pretty notable. On Friday, Karen Immergut heard these different views of these protests. The Trump attorneys were saying that federal law enforcement had been assaulted. There were bricks and rocks and pepper spray and incendiary devices. And the attorneys for Portland were like, no, things were pretty mild, actually. Like, they were sitting in lawn chairs. So that was Friday. And then, Saturday, of course, because of all of the attention, there is this very large march. Like, once again, these things have escalated in part because of Trump's attention. And so on Saturday, Immergut rules in favor of the city of Portland and the state of Oregon, blocking the Oregon National Guard. But it kind of seems like it leads to this escalation of the federal tactics that are being used on the protesters, right? So you see the feds are using tear gas, they're using flashbangs, they're using pepper balls, and it doesn't seem like there's provocation. And I think, if you look at the order and the memo around Antifa that were issued like 2 weeks ago, part of what's going on is this very clear attempt to clamp down on any kind of protest or any objection to anything the Trump administration is doing.
Yeah, you've called this approach the everything is terrorism approach. Just calling anything that is against what your administration wants to do is so norm busting, it has to be met with force.
Yeah. And the thing is, again, what you see is chicken suits, and goofiness from the protesters rather than anything that's threatening. Like, if you think about 1968, or any of the other various protests, sort of historically, there was an edge to them. And it wasn't people showing up to goof around. It wasn't people showing up to do something funny or stunt on the troops. It was, people showing up to protest, and sometimes things got violent. Whereas it's really hard to justify looking for the valve in somebody's inflatable frog costume so that you can stick tear gas in it, right? Like, that's a little harder for people to say, oh, yeah, you're really being threatened by this guy in a frog costume who's doing pelvic thrusts. Like, boy, you must be in fear for your life. And so I think the goofiness that we've been seeing from the protesters is actually a pretty effective weapon at de-escalating whatever is going on and making the feds look absurd.
Elizabeth, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Elizabeth Lopato is a senior reporter at The Verge. Earlier, you heard from Isaac Stanley Becker. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic. And that's the show. What Next is produced by Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. Paige Osburn is the senior supervising producer of What Next and What Next TBD. Mia Lobel is the head of audio at Slate. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. Say, hey, I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.